Picture a solid block of plastic, the kind used to build the dashboard of your car, the case of your smartphone, or the bottle holding your water. It is hard, durable, and designed to last for centuries. Now, imagine taking that exact piece of plastic, dropping it into a regular glass of tap water, and watching it completely vanish. It does not just break into smaller, toxic pieces. It simply dissolves. Like sugar stirred into hot tea, it ceases to exist. For decades, the basic rule of modern manufacturing was simple. If you want a material to be cheap and indestructible, you use plastic. If you want it to be safe for the earth, you use something else. You could never have both. But inside a laboratory in China, a team of engineers just broke that rule. They built a structural plastic that looks, feels, and acts exactly like the petroleum-based plastic sitting in your house right now. Except this one completely disappears on command. If you are enjoying videos like this, please hit the like button because it takes a lot of effort to make these, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. This is not a concept hidden in a science fiction movie. It is a tested, physical reality. A traditional piece of plastic takes over 400 years to decompose. This new material breaks down completely in just a matter of days. And the cost to produce it is already dropping to a level that competes directly with cheap oil. This breakthrough is sending shockwaves through the boardrooms of the largest chemical companies in the United States. American corporations make billions pumping out single-use plastics every single year. Our entire modern supply chain relies on a material that never dies. If a foreign lab has figured out how to mass-produce a cheap plastic that dissolves harmlessly into the earth, the old way of doing business is suddenly obsolete. We just saw exactly what this new material does. But to understand why this is a direct threat to a trillion-dollar global economy, we have to look at the massive trap we are currently stuck in. For the last 40 years, American consumers have been sold a comforting story. You buy a plastic bottle, you drink from it, and you toss it into a blue bin on the curb. A truck takes it away, and somehow, it gets melted down and turned into a park bench or a new container. It feels good. It feels responsible. But it is mostly a statistical illusion. The truth is brutal. Less than 10% of all the plastic ever created has actually been recycled. The other 90% is still here. It is sitting in giant landfills just outside your city limits. It is floating in massive garbage patches in the Pacific Ocean. And worse, it is slowly breaking down into microscopic fragments. These tiny shards, called microplastics, do not disappear. They just get smaller and more dangerous. They seep into the agricultural soil where we grow our food. They contaminate the tap water we drink. Recently, scientists have found them in human blood, deep inside lung tissue, and even clogging major arteries. The exact material that built the modern American lifestyle is now silently building up inside our own bodies. This was not a tragic accident. It was a calculated business strategy. The giant oil and chemical companies knew decades ago that recycling plastic on a massive scale was economically impossible. Sorting, cleaning, and melting old plastic simply costs a lot more than making brand new plastic straight out of cheap oil. But if the American public believed recycling worked, they would keep buying disposable products without feeling guilty. The blue recycling bin was essentially a brilliant marketing tool. It was a psychological shield designed to protect a trillion-dollar industry from public backlash and strict government rules. Now, that shield is cracking. The health consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Governments worldwide are facing massive pressure to ban single-use plastics entirely. But you cannot just ban plastic without a realistic backup plan. Hospitals desperately need sterile syringes and IV bags. Grocery stores need secure packaging to keep food from rotting during transport. Amazon needs lightweight shipping materials to deliver packages across the country. If you pull petroleum plastic out of the US, economy today, the entire system collapses by tomorrow morning. We are trapped in a corner. We are completely dependent on a toxic material that we cannot safely get rid of. Fixing the old plastic is no longer a viable option. The world desperately needed a total replacement. It needed a new material that acted exactly like plastic on the shelf, but vanished like a fallen leaf when thrown away. And that brings us to a quiet group of engineers in Asia who decided to stop trying to fix oil-based plastic altogether. To understand how this disappearing trick actually works, you first have to look at how every previous attempt failed. For years, scientists tried to create green plastic by mixing raw plant fibers into regular petroleum plastic. Think of it like baking a cake. If you mix a handful of sawdust into your cake batter, you do not suddenly create a healthy cake. You just ruin the original recipe. The old mixed plastics were weak, they were incredibly expensive to manufacture, and they still left toxic chemicals behind in the dirt. It was a compromise that satisfied absolutely no one. The Chinese research team threw that old recipe in the trash. They did not want to mix oil and plants. They wanted to remove the oil completely. They started their work with bamboo. Bamboo is cheap, highly renewable, and grows faster than almost any common weed in America. But raw bamboo is extremely rigid. The secret to its natural strength is something called cellulose. Cellulose is the microscopic skeleton inside the plant. It is the exact structure that makes wood hard and helps tall grass stand up straight in the wind. Normally, you cannot mold raw cellulose into a perfectly shaped phone case or a hospital syringe. If you bend it too far, it simply snaps in half. To make it act like industrial plastic, you have to change it at the deepest molecular level. Think of these natural cellulose molecules like a giant box of tangled extension cords. They are knotted together tightly by incredibly strong chemical bonds. That is exactly why a thick bamboo stalk is so hard to break with your bare hands. The Chinese engineers found a specific liquid solution that carefully unties those chemical knots without breaking the cords themselves. Once the microscopic cords are untied and completely loose, the engineers introduce a second liquid. This second chemical acts as a guide, telling the loose molecules to reconnect in a brand new, highly organized pattern. It is exactly like taking apart a stiff Lego castle and snapping the exact same plastic pieces back together into a smooth, flexible, solid sheet. This new molecular arrangement locks together incredibly tight. It can handle boiling heat without melting. It can bounce back from heavy physical impacts just like a standard car bumper. But here is the truly brilliant part of the engineering. They built a hidden self-destruct mechanism right into those new chemical bonds. When this material hits specific natural triggers, like the normal, everyday microbes found in your backyard dirt, or a large volume of plain tap water, those specific bonds simply let go. The molecular Lego pieces completely detach from each other. The rigid structure collapses instantly, turning back into harmless natural carbon. The plastic just stops being plastic. Making a neat chemistry trick in a controlled laboratory is easy. University scientists do it all the time. But a cool lab experiment does not threaten a trillion-dollar American industry. The real reason this specific discovery is terrifying Western corporate executives is not just the clever chemistry. It is what happened when they finally took it out of the laboratory. They figured out how to build it at mass scale. To appreciate why this Chinese breakthrough is setting off alarms across the global manufacturing sector, you have to look at the massive failures that came before it. Western companies have tried for decades to invent a true replacement for oil-based plastic. They threw billions of dollars into research and development. They launched massive marketing campaigns claiming they had finally solved the global waste problem. But every single one of those celebrated green products ended up failing the reality test. Take the most famous Western alternative, a material called PLA. It is made primarily from fermented cornstarch. If you have ever ordered a cold drink from an upscale American coffee shop, you have probably held a cup made of PLA. The label clearly says it is compostable. But what the label hides is a massive technical catch. If you throw that cup into a regular trash can, it does not just melt back into the earth. It requires an industrial composting facility that maintains extremely high heat for weeks at a time to actually break down the chemical structure. If that same cup blows into a river or gets buried in a normal city landfill, it will sit there for decades, acting exactly like the toxic plastic it was supposed to replace. Another heavily funded Western attempt was PHA, a plastic grown using complex bacteria. It actually breaks down in normal environments, which sounds perfect on paper. The fatal flaw was the price tag. Producing PHA requires incredibly expensive, specialized equipment. The final product costs several times more than regular petroleum plastic. When the price is that high, major corporations like Amazon and Walmart simply refuse to buy it for their millions of daily packages. The math just does not work for a business trying to turn a profit. Every Western attempt hit the same exact wall. They were too fragile to protect goods, too expensive to mass produce, or they demanded massive industrial ovens just to die properly. This is exactly where the new Chinese material changes the fundamental rules of the game. It does not require a $1 million high-heat oven to trigger its breakdown. It does not require complex bacteria vats. The process happens entirely at normal room temperature. That removes a massive layer of energy cost from the manufacturing equation. But the most dangerous advantage is how it handles the machinery itself. The Chinese material can be poured directly into the exact same injection molding machines that American factories already use to make standard plastic parts today. There is no need to rip out old factory equipment. There is no need to spend billions retooling assembly lines. If a material works seamlessly in standard machines, the biggest barrier to mass production just vanished into thin air. It means a factory can switch from toxic plastic to disappearing plastic over a single weekend. And that simple fact brings us directly to the factory floor, where the real threat to the American economy is taking shape. Ideas are great when they stay inside clean laboratories, but they only matter when they hit the dirty reality of the factory floor. Right now, in vast industrial zones across China, this new bamboo-based material is making that exact jump. It is leaving the realm of science experiments and entering the brutal world of mass production. To understand how fast they are scaling this up, you just have to look at the supply chain they already control. China has the largest commercial bamboo forests on the planet. These forests cover millions of acres. The farming systems, the heavy transport trucks, and the raw processing mills are already fully operational. They do not have to wait 10 years to plant a new crop or build a new network of logging roads. The raw material is sitting right there, naturally growing up to 3 feet in a single day, waiting to be cut and processed. When that raw bamboo gets converted into the new molecular plastic, it heads straight to standard manufacturing plants. Picture a typical American factory in Ohio that makes plastic forks, automotive parts, or hospital trays. They rely on injection molding machines. These are giant metal presses that melt hard plastic pellets and shoot the liquid into cold steel molds. For decades, those machines have only swallowed toxic, oil-based plastic. Now, Chinese operators are pouring the new dissolving bamboo material right into the exact same hoppers. Because they use the existing machines at standard room temperatures, the cost of manufacturing drops like a stone. They bypass the massive capital expenses that always crush Western alternative materials. Factory owners do not have to buy millions of dollars in new equipment. They just swap the raw ingredients. When you combine an endless, incredibly cheap supply of bamboo with existing factory infrastructure, the economic math changes violently. The researchers estimate the production cost is already dropping dangerously close to the rock-bottom price of raw petroleum plastic. In global manufacturing, price is the only metric that actually matters. A massive corporation like Apple or Walmart will not switch to a green material if it damages their quarterly profit margins. But if the new material costs the same as the old toxic plastic, behaves exactly the same on a store shelf, and dissolves completely into dirt when thrown away, the choice becomes a basic business calculation. This is what raw industrial scale looks like. It is not a distant promise. Factories are actively churning out test runs of shipping packaging, car components, and everyday consumer goods. The speed of execution is staggering. They took a radical chemical theory and turned it into an active assembly line, while the rest of the world was still arguing over paper straws. A cheap, superior material built at this scale does not just win scientific awards. It actively destroys established markets. It wipes out old business models. It pulls money directly out of the pockets of the companies that bet their entire future on the old way of doing things. And right now, the biggest and most powerful incumbents in the global plastic market are sitting squarely in the United States. To see exactly why this Chinese breakthrough feels like a direct financial attack, you first have to look at the massive bets recently placed by American corporations. The U.S. economy is built heavily on a foundation of cheap oil and abundant natural gas. For decades, giant companies like ExxonMobil and Dow Chemical made incredible fortunes selling gasoline to fuel millions of American cars. But as electric vehicles rapidly take over the global transportation market, the long-term demand for traditional gasoline is visibly slowing down. To survive this massive global shift, the big American oil companies made a very specific and very expensive pivot. They started pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into massive new petrochemical plants, with many of them located along the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana. These giant sprawling facilities exist for one primary reason: to take raw fossil fuels and chemically transform them into cheap, single-use plastic. From the thin plastic wrapping on your grocery store meat to the hard plastic casing of a brand new television set, that material represents the future profit margins of the entire American energy sector. They basically bet their corporate survival on the world needing more plastic every single year. Now look at the brutal timing. Just as American companies are locking in their trillion-dollar bets on oil-based plastic, China unveils a structural replacement that costs nearly the same to produce, performs just as well on the factory floor, and dissolves completely into harmless dirt. If major global brands switch to this new bamboo-based material to satisfy intense consumer demand for real environmental solutions, the American petrochemical strategy takes a devastating and immediate hit. Think about the sheer volume of material we use every day without even noticing. Amazon ships billions of packages wrapped in plastic bubble mailers. The U.S. healthcare system throws away millions of plastic syringes, IV bags, and sterile surgical tools daily. Every major automotive plant in Detroit uses thousands of pounds of rigid plastic molding for modern car interiors. If the essential raw material for all of those products suddenly shifts from an oil rig in Texas to a bamboo forest and a processing plant in China, a massive pillar of American industrial wealth begins to crumble quickly. This is not a slow, gradual threat that companies can ignore for a decade. Corporate buyers move fast when the math works in their favor. If a major global shipping company can completely eliminate its massive waste management costs and simultaneously brag about using a truly zero-waste green product, they will sign the new contract in a heartbeat. They will not care if the base material comes from a factory in Ohio or a plant in Shenzhen. They only care about protecting the bottom line. The threat cuts much deeper than just corporate profits. It cuts directly into American manufacturing jobs and the security of the domestic supply chain. If the United States loses its firm grip on the base material that builds the modern physical world, it loses critical leverage in every major international trade negotiation. The battle over this new technology is no longer a friendly, low-stakes debate about saving ocean turtles or cleaning up city parks. It is a brutal, high-stakes fight for who controls the essential raw materials of the next century. And that fight leads to an uncomfortable truth about the shifting balance of global power. The story of a plastic that vanishes into water is not really a story about environmentalism. It is a story about absolute control. For the last 100 years, the nation that controlled the cheap oil controlled the plastic, and the nation that controlled the plastic controlled the physical economy of the entire world. That was the classic American playbook. Now, we are watching a massive, calculated pivot unfold in real time. China is aggressively maneuvering to control the next era of physical goods. We have seen this exact strategic playbook before. They did it perfectly with solar panels, driving the global price down so far that Western competitors simply went bankrupt and folded. They did it with electric vehicle batteries, quietly locking up the raw lithium and building the massive processing factories before American car companies even realized what was happening. Now, They are applying that exact same brutal market logic to the fundamental building block of modern manufacturing itself. By mastering a cheap, mass-produced material that fundamentally outperforms petroleum plastic, they are positioning themselves as the sole supplier of the next industrial revolution. If the United States and Europe eventually ban traditional single-use plastics, which is a serious political move gaining major momentum right now, where do you think the replacement material will come from? It will not come from a refinery in Texas. It will come from the massive bamboo processing plants in China. They are actively building the exact solution to a global crisis they know is coming. This leaves the United States in an incredibly dangerous position. If American companies ignore the bamboo breakthrough and stubbornly stick to their massive investments in toxic oil plastic, they risk becoming globally irrelevant. They will be stuck selling a dirty product that no modern brand wants to buy. But if they adopt the Chinese solution, they hand over absolute control of their basic supply chain to a foreign rival. It is a brilliant, undeniable trap. The era of indestructible plastic is coming to an end. The toxic material that built our modern lives is quietly becoming obsolete, replaced by a strange chemical trick that turns raw bamboo into a vanishing ghost. The nation that owns this new material will dictate global trade for decades to come. The United States spent 40 years trying to recycle a flawed product, while China simply engineered a way to make it disappear entirely. The only question left is whether the American economy can figure out a way to compete, or if we are about to watch another massive trillion-dollar industry dissolve right in front of our eyes.